When my stepfather called me that morning, the Afghan sun was burning through the dust and silence of the camp. His voice, trembling with arrogance, came through the weak satellite signal. "I've sold your father's cabin to pay off our debts, and fund Chloe's trip to Europe." He even laughed, his usual deep, mocking laugh that always made my stomach twist. I stared at the horizon, calm, too calm for someone who'd just been told her late father's only legacy was gone. "Thanks for the update," I said flatly. He didn't know that my calm wasn't forgiveness. It was a promise. I grew up in a small town in Montana, surrounded by pine trees and secrets. My father, a quiet war veteran, built a cabin deep in the woods, a simple structure of cedar and stone that smelled of firewood, whiskey, and love. When I was 16, he died suddenly in a car accident. 3 months later, my mother married Gregory Shaw, a man who smiled too easily and loved money more than anything. He had a daughter, Chloe, who was my age, and from the first day, she treated me like I was trespassing in my own home. Gregory was the kind of man who'd pat your shoulder with one hand and steal from your pocket with the other. My mother was blinded by his charm, or maybe she just wanted the comfort he promised. I learned quickly that in that house, I was alone. So, I joined the army. By 24, I was deployed to Afghanistan. I found something there that felt close to peace, the noise, the chaos, the simplicity of knowing your mission. You wake up, you survive, you protect your team. Then one morning, amid a patrol in Helmand, my satellite phone buzzed. It was Gregory. He said those words, those smug, careless words about selling the cabin, and something inside me broke so quietly it was almost beautiful. He thought he had taken everything from me. He didn't realize he had just given me purpose. 8 months later, my deployment ended. I returned to Montana under the radar, quiet as a shadow. My mother didn't even know I was coming home. When I arrived, the town looked smaller. The people looked older. But the memories were sharper than ever. I drove past the hardware store my dad once owned, past the school Chloe and I used to attend, until I reached the edge of Pinewood Forest. The cabin wasn't there anymore, at least not the way I remembered it. A "for sale" sign leaned crooked in the front yard, and a fresh layer of concrete covered the foundation. They hadn't just sold it. They'd torn it down. I stood there, staring at the empty space, feeling the silence seep into my bones. The trees whispered in the wind, almost like my father's voice saying, "Be patient, Leah. Revenge is a dish best served cold." And I listened. I went back to town and checked into a cheap motel. I spent the next few days gathering information, quietly, efficiently, like the soldier I'd become. From an old friend at the courthouse, I learned that the cabin had been sold to a developer named Carl Benson, but the paperwork was strange. The transfer went through a shell company that Gregory had set up under his name. He had taken the payment, all $320,000 of it, and used most of it to pay off gambling debts. The rest funded Chloe's luxury Europe trip and a new BMW. But here's the twist. My father had built that cabin on land that technically didn't belong to the state. It sat on an old mining plot that had reverted to private ownership, but the title was in my father's name, held in a hidden trust. A trust that was legally mine. Which meant Gregory had just committed real estate fraud. The next day, I put my uniform away and pulled out the version of myself that Afghanistan had forged, calm, precise, patient. First, I paid a visit to Chloe. She was back from Europe, sun-kissed, spoiled, and still convinced the world existed to please her. I found her at the town cafe, bragging about Paris and Milan. I walked in wearing a baseball cap and jeans, and she barely recognized me. "Leah? Oh my God, you're back." We so missed you, she said, smirking like she didn't mean a word. I heard about the cabin, I replied softly. Oh, that old place? Dad said it was falling apart. You should thank him, he used the money wisely. I bet he did. I left her there, her fake nails tapping her coffee cup, unaware that the walls were already closing in. Next, I met Carl Benson, the developer who'd bought the property. A brief conversation revealed what I suspected. He'd paid Gregory in cash installments, with no idea that the land title was invalid. I showed him the original deed from the trust. He went pale. Are you saying I built on stolen land? Exactly. But I can help you, I told him. What do you want? Simple. Transfer the land and everything on it to me quietly. In exchange, I won't take this to the authorities, or the press. He agreed immediately. Within 2 weeks, the cabin's land and everything on it were legally mine again. Gregory had no clue. He thought I was still overseas, sending postcards from Kabul. That's when I started phase 2. I needed Gregory to feel what he made me feel, helpless, betrayed, small. I forged an anonymous letter to the local paper, exposing his business dealings. Then I sent another to the sheriff, with documents showing his fraudulent sale and unpaid taxes. Within days, word spread like wildfire. The bank froze his accounts. The developer threatened to sue. The sheriff called him in for questioning. Gregory's perfect world began to crumble. I waited until he was desperate, until he was drowning. Then I called him. Gregory, I said calmly, heard you've been having some financial troubles. Leah? His voice cracked. Where the hell are you? You've got to help me. They're saying the land wasn't mine. It wasn't, I interrupted. What do you mean? It belonged to my father. And now it belongs to me. There was silence. I could almost hear his breath stop. You set me up? No. You set yourself up. I just let the truth catch up with you. He screamed my name, cursed me, threatened me, but I hung up. The next day, the sheriff came knocking on his door with an arrest warrant for fraud and tax evasion. Chloe's new car was repossessed. Their house was seized. My mother called me, sobbing. But I didn't answer. Weeks later, I returned to the cabin site, my land now. I stood where my father once chopped wood and told me stories about honor, courage, and patience. Then I heard footsteps behind me. It was Gregory. Disheveled, defeated, eyes full of hate. You did this, he hissed. No, I said softly. You did this when you laughed about selling what wasn't yours. You think this makes you better than me? No. It makes me my father's daughter. He lunged at me, but he was weak, broken. I stepped aside, letting him fall into the dirt. You're a soldier, he spat. You're supposed to protect. I am. I'm protecting what's left of my family's legacy. I turned away as he cursed me, his voice cracking into the empty air. That night, I rebuilt the first wall of the cabin myself, by hand. Every hammer strike felt like a heartbeat returning to the land. Months passed. I used the money Gregory had hidden, now reclaimed through the trust, to restore the cabin exactly as my father built it. The day it was finished, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset through the pines. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Then my mother arrived. She looked thinner, older, guilt heavy in her eyes. Leah, she whispered. I didn't know he'd do all that. Didn't you? I asked quietly. She looked away. I left him, she said finally. I'm sorry. I nodded, unsure what forgiveness meant anymore. But I let her stay that night. As the fire crackled, I thought of my father, his steady hands, his laughter, his cabin that had once been a home. Gregory was now behind bars. Chloe had vanished from town. The debts, the lies, the greed, they had all burned away, leaving behind only ashes and truth. Before bed, I took a photo frame from my duffel. Inside was the last picture of my father and me, standing right where I was sitting now. I kept your promise, Dad, I whispered. They thought they sold your legacy, but all they did was sell their own souls. The wind blew through the trees like an answer, gentle, approving. And as I closed my eyes, I realized something. Revenge hadn't made me cruel. It had made me whole. The next morning, as sunlight spilled across the porch, I carved new words into the wooden beam above the door. Some things can be sold. Others must be earned. That was the day my father's cabin came back to life. And the day I finally did too. The end.